Hey everybody, we're back to go ahead and reassemble this iPhone 5S that we've taken apart completely. So we just have our green housing here, which we're going to change. One of the first things we're going to do is put back in the display holders that I took off on the sides. In the last video I was talking about how my phone or my camera clipped out on me and I couldn't actually record it. So here's the little clips right here. You want to make sure that you put the open end in. They're different sizes, so make sure you pay attention to when you remove them. You can't really mess them up when you're putting them back in either. So it takes 2 screws to put this back in. And you'll see that the bottom side of it has a metal rounded, and the top side will have an opening where you could slide a display into it, just like this. You can see that it'll pop in and clip in. So that will be our first step of this reassembly video. We have a few of these to put in. Go ahead and get started. They're just Phillips screws. All of the 4 that we took off, or the 8 screws we took off, are all the same size, so no need to keep those in the distinct order. But make sure you put these on nice and snug. You want to over tighten them, you don't want to strip them out, but you want to make them to be snug enough that it'll hold your display in, so make sure you put them in with a little bit of force. They can be a little bit tricky. And my screwdriver is losing its magnetism, unfortunately. Make sure you do not cross thread them, so make sure it starts in nice and easy. Definitely don't want to ruin our housing the first time we get it. Just put them in nice and snug. We'll do our next one. It's a little bit longer and goes towards the top portion of the phone. Put in our second screw. Go ahead and start on the opposite side. Now the opposite side, the locations are a little bit different since the volume button and the mute button are here. So the first one goes a little bit lower down into the mid frame. You'll see that it's a nice short little connector for it. One more screw to go. Perfect. We have one last connector to put in. I'm just going to tighten down this other screw here, make sure it's nice and snug. One last portion to put in for the display connector goes towards the bottom of the screen, or the bottom of the frame. One last screw. Make sure both of these are nice and tight. Screw was a little bit funky putting in, so I'm just going to move it around here for just a second. Screw just does not want to sit flat on my screwdriver here. Alright, there we go. We're going to put in our SIM card slot portion. You want to make sure the tall end goes towards where the small pinhole is at. The lower end will go towards the opening. You can see right here. The tall end goes toward the bottom of the phone, and the short end goes towards the top of the phone. Perfect. Just make sure it moves back and forth so we can eject the SIM slot. Next step is to go ahead and put in our Wi-Fi antenna here. You want to make sure that this opening, this round hole to the left side of the screen, goes down onto the screw opening. You should have some adhesive left over on it. Go ahead and press it down into its correct spot. You'll see that it'll be a little bit lower into the glass and then a little bit raised back onto the metal portion, which is perfectly fine. Maybe use a plastic pry tool to help push this down in the corners and the edges. You can see that this will connect onto the back of the logic board. So we have a pinhole here. This is needed for the latch door for the power button. Now there's two ways that you can do this. You can pull this out of your old phone, which is right here. Normally you have to destroy it to get it out, or you can just order a new one off of eBay. They're a couple bucks. It's not a big deal. Just use a pair of tweezers to try to get it out. Sometimes you have to destroy it to get it all the way removed out of the device. So I'm just going to use a brand new one that I have. See, here is our home button itself. You need to make sure that the silver portion goes upwards to the top of the phone. The little hinge on the power button. It'll be a little bit tricky to get to stay in there. We then have our power button assembly here. We got our volume buttons, our mute switch. And these will go overlapping on the side of the phone, making sure that if we took the metal piece off, we put it back on, and the holes of the volume button are lined up to the cutouts within the metal portion. Here is our actual volume button hinge as well. So the pin will actually go in place and through the hinge portion of the power button. So making sure that we get it lined up so it fits in correctly. You'll see the rounded edge on the power button door itself needs to fit through the opening for the the pin that we're going to press in here in just a few seconds. Once you get that lined up, we can go ahead and move on to the next step. Let's get that little pin here. We can also put in a screw for the power button. This helps out greatly when trying to do this little portion here. So if you put the screw into the power button to hold it into place, that'll save you a lot of time. Just making sure I get it lined up properly. And take our little pin. The small side goes in first, the larger end will go towards the top. And just using a flat tipped tool, go ahead and press it into its slot. Looks good. Now sometimes your housing will come with a pin already in place. And one thing that I missed is if you're ordering new power buttons, you need to take this little tiny metal piece off of the other power button if it didn't come with it and put it on the new one. This may not seem like a lot, but it really will make the difference between your phone's power button functioning and not functioning. So we're just going to use a razor blade to go ahead and pull it off. And then put it back onto this device, this power button. Just that little silver circle right in the middle. Alright, so now that we've done that, we can go ahead and put our power button back in. We're going to go ahead and install the little trapdoor hinge assembly back onto the pin we just installed. All I have to do is hold the door almost upright and then slide it in behind and then slide the door shut. Everything's lined up, so we're going to go ahead and put the screw in place. And tighten the hinge door down, just making sure the button's functioning properly for us. Now when you're fiddling with the power buttons, the volume buttons, sometimes you don't have to tighten them down extremely tight. You may have to back off the screw just a little bit to make sure you get the button pressing function down. We're just going to go ahead and lay down the power cable. Now if you are watching this video to replace just the power cable, you truly don't need to remove the bottom speaker portion or the Wi-Fi antenna or the sides of the phone that hold down the display. But you would almost basically need to remove everything else to get to this point. So just lining up the volume buttons down the side, making sure the volume buttons fit back into place here. Volume up, make sure is at the top portion of the phone, the volume button down is a little bit below. Pretty excited that I got black buttons for this instead of using the green ones that it came with. Give it a little bit better look. So make sure we put the screw in for the bottom portion of the housing first. We'll put the screw for the bottom portion first because we need to overlap the mute button onto the volume up side. So go ahead and put this in. You don't have to put it in extremely snug. Go ahead and just put it in until it's a little bit loose. You want to be able to wiggle the other side of the metal volume up and down just a little bit to get it into place. Making sure the volume buttons protrude correctly out of the device. Also, unfortunately, I just realized that I'm going to need the metal contacts off the back of the volume up and down that I did not remove. So we're going to go ahead and take the button back out and go ahead and pull those off and put them onto the new volume up and down button. You can see how it's missing the shiny silver portion of it. So just using a razor blade, we'll go ahead and just pop these off. Just be very careful not to slip and cut yourself with them. You can use whatever sharp thing you want. Dental pick, razor blade, anything that you feel will help. Have a little bit of adhesive on the back, so you can use some heat to go ahead and remove them. I usually find that if I just kind of use this correctly, I can just pop them right off. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to get off. Just try a dental pick here, see if that'll work a little bit better for me. This one's a little bit more stubborn than the power button. It's just really nice and flush, and that's the problem for us. Here we go. Go ahead and put this on the new button. Second one come off much easier. We'll go ahead and put this onto the other portion of the button here. There'll be an indentation of where they need to fit. Make sure they fit exactly into that indentation so they press correctly on the button on the ribbon cable. If you do have to use a little bit of glue to make sure they stick, just use a little tiny dab of something like super glue or something to get them to stick in there. Making sure again that when I put this back in, volume is towards the top of the phone and volume down is towards the bottom of the phone. Put our screw back in the lower portion. You can see that we have our mute switch here. And this little silver door on the mute switch came off. So we're going to put the orange portion of the mute switch towards the top, facing up for the display. Now the mute switch needs to overlap on top of the volume metal portion of the screw area. Just make sure the switch works properly. We'll go ahead and put the secondary screw in for the mute switch and the top of the volume button now. Like I was saying, the mute switch metal housing should be on top of the volume. Check our volume buttons here. Now sometimes the volume buttons can be a little bit tricky. You may have to back the screws out a little bit to make sure the pressing motion functions properly. They should have some Loctite on them, so it looks like it was made to do this. If you put them in too tight, the button is continually depressed. So to make sure you get the clicking motion and for it to function properly, you may have to back the screws off just a little bit. So I fiddled with them for just a few seconds and made sure that I got them to where I want them. They feel comfortable. I just backed the screw out just a little tiny bit, maybe a 1/16 of a turn at a time until I got it exactly where I wanted it. We're going to go ahead and put the next screw in to the mute switch up here towards the top where the vibration module is going to go in. That's going to be our next steps, to put the vibration module in, making sure we put it back in on top of the Wi-Fi antenna. If you line the Wi-Fi antenna up correctly, the contacts on the bottom of the vibration module fit perfect. We have two screws that are going to go back into the vibration module here. One goes in the top of the device, and the second one goes in towards the rear portion of the vibration module. So we have our little tiny piece of metal housing here. That'll go on top of the area for the Wi-Fi antenna and the top of the vibration module. We're going to put the first screw in to the Wi-Fi antenna portion, and then our second screw will go right here at the top. Just make sure the buttons still function properly after that, and everything should be set for us. It seems like the power button adhesive is never as sticky as it was the first time, so it may not adhere itself down. Just try to make sure you get this portion at the top where my thumb is currently at put in place. It's going to be where the logic board kind of covers over it. The next step is the little cover for the power button up here at the top, this metal silver cover here. Put our first screw in. Now I did miss a section where I should put a little ribbon cable connector onto this. I'll show you that in just a few seconds if you do forget it as well. But it's the portion we took off of the power button, and it connects just to this portion right here. It's just like a little grounding cable. So it can be a little bit tricky to get to set in correctly. It has a kind of a hinge plate you need to put in on the left side of it, and then put the screw in once it sits nice and flush and flat. Second screw will go into place. And the device is starting to take shape. Probably one of the hardest portions of the entire thing is putting this home button back in, and the power button. I mean, not the home button, the power button and the volume button back into place. So once you've got that done, you're looking to do pretty well. So here is our little connector. We have this little grounding clip that needs to go at the top of the device. Right here. So we'll put our screw into the top of the device. Now this actually kind of clips onto the logic board. So you want to make sure you leave enough space for the logic board to fit underneath it. So you don't have to tighten it down. You can leave it just snug enough where you can move the little grounding clip around a little bit. Next step is the grounding clip that I missed that I was just talking about. It goes for the power button and for this metal housing here. So I'm just going to remove this housing here just real fast. It seems like I always forget this grounding clip. So if you have an extra one lying around, this is probably where it goes. We need to undo the power button hinge screw here. And take our grounding clip, put it through the round portion of it, and screw this button back together. You can see the clip, the open end, will fit with this little metal housing here that covers up the flash area of the power button cable. Now that we've done that, we can go ahead and put in our screws here and re-adhere the housing to the frame of the phone. Just make sure our power button still functions properly, which it does. Alright, now the next step is to put the logic board in. You can put in the bottom portion of the device if you'd like to first, the speaker, microphone. It can be easier to do it that way. I kind of like to put the logic board in because I want to make sure everything fits back together properly that I've done so far. So we're going to clip the Wi-Fi antenna back down to the opposite side of the board, the little wire clip, and make sure that it's going to line up correctly with all the screw slots, which it does for us. Put our little grounding clip back over onto the logic board here, and we can tighten our screw down. We're going to go ahead and clip in the volume power button cable onto the logic board. These cables can be a little bit tricky. Don't force them in. A lot of the pins can get bent, so you just want to use firm pressure until it snaps in. It may take you a few tries. If you tilt the device until you can see exactly where it goes into place, that might be a little bit easier. Alright, so we have our button reconnected. We're going to insert the screws for the logic board. Make sure you put them back in the exact same place as you remove them. The standoffs need to go in a certain spot. You'll see me switch my bit here for the flathead bit, and we'll use that to put the standoff screws back in place. First one goes right here at the top of the device. See if we can get some tweezers to help us out since my screwdriver is losing its magnetism. Could just use a magnetizer if I had one, but unfortunately I do not. So putting in the screws for the logic board. One more standoff to go, it looks like, because right down here in the bottom portion of the logic board. Sometimes it's going to be a little bit tricky, so just take your time. Make sure the screw threads in straight and even. Switching our bit back to the Phillips, we have a couple more screws to put in the logic board. Alright, we have all of our screws in for our logic board now. I'm going to go ahead and insert our SIM slot to make sure it functions properly, which it does. Perfect. Starting to look really cool with our black buttons and SIM slot. Go ahead and put our camera back in. It's going to blow on it a little bit, make sure there's no dust that's trapped underneath. Make sure that it sits nice and flat, and then we can put down our connector onto the logic board. Alright, now we have two little connectors that are going to go down here. You have one that's kind of a jointed connector that'll go from screw slot to screw slot, and one that'll be a little tiny thin washer that'll go right on top of the top screws of where the charging port's going to connect back in. So make sure you get them lined up. We have our ribbon cable connector here for the entirety of the bottom of the device. You need to connect the little microphone slot onto the little rubber gasket that we moved over here in the last video. Make sure that goes on first, and then you can kind of push in the 3.5mm headphone jack, the charge port area, make sure everything fits back into place. Just be careful not to jostle the device too much. We're going to put a screw in here at the bottom left-hand corner to kind of keep everything into place for a few seconds while you mess around with it. Looking for this metal housing, determining where exactly it fits onto the device at. Just going to go ahead and start inputting the screws where we remove them from of the device. Go ahead and connect our cable for the charge port back onto the logic board. Connect our little wire connector here. Now I'd actually wait to connect this wire connector just till a little bit later after we put the speaker back in. It'll save you a little bit of time. But it is kind of nice just to get out of the way if you're starting to input screws back in. Just use our nylon tool to press down the cable here, make sure it gets a nice snug fit. Go ahead and put our speaker port back in. Now you need to put the top portion in underneath the logic board first. And there's a portion off to the right side that needs to go underneath as well. Can be a little bit tricky to get both into the correct spot at the same time. Finagling it just a little bit, you'll get it in there. Just going to make sure the little cable connector down here at the bottom of this fits back into its correct spot. We're going to undo a screw, remove our little metal connector here. We need to make sure that we put this speaker portion in first. And then the little metal housing that holds the home button connector will actually fit right back in on top of it. Remove the wire connector because that needs to go around the speaker port as well.